Hello and welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. Privacy regulations, quote, should establish a way to hold companies such as Facebook accountable by imposing sanctions, end quote. These are the words written by the founder of Facebook himself, Mark Zuckerberg, in an article published by the Washington Post this weekend. Now, it's really when the founder of an organization himself calls for punishment that you know something has terribly gone wrong. On tonight's show, we discuss if Facebook, after countless scandals, including its role in the ethnic cleansing of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, to the live streaming of the Christchurch attacks, has finally realized where it has gone wrong. Will there be any changes in how the big tech company deals with the incitement of violence and political discourse? We also talk about Facebook's decision to shut down hundreds of accounts in a number of countries and its decision to finally start cracking down on white nationalism. Joining us for this discussion today is Mr. Ross O'Leary, who's a political analyst joining us from Dublin. Also joining us today is Mr. Adam Smith, who is a social media expert joining us from London. Thank you both for joining us. Mr. Ross, let me begin with you. What, in your opinion, has the role Facebook played in this age of disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, and manipulation?
Well, I think what we've seen, especially since the United States presidential elections in 2016, is for the first time on a global scale, the weaponization of social media. And I think that this massive power that Facebook has also comes with massive responsibility. What they're doing is obviously trying to tackle fake news and the spread of false information, which in this hybrid media system means that there's no longer a limited number of actors. It's not just a news anchor like yourself or an analyst like me. Anyone can have an opinion. Yeah. Anyone can spread a story all across the world. So I think Facebook and Twitter and the likes targeting certain either individuals or companies is an essential part of what they're doing. But I think what they need to be doing is kind of amping up these efforts. Because when a tweet can go viral that has completely baseless claims or spreads complete misinformation, that kind of undermines democracy and undermines free speech. So I think there needs to be cooperation between Facebook and an international contingent of governments in order to effectively tackle this.
Yeah, and Ross, that is something that Facebook itself also, the post that was issued by Mark Zuckerberg, in which he alluded that governments all around the world need to also interfere and take a hold of this situation. And I want to get to that. But before that, I want to ask Adam this. Now, a report published in the New York Times in November, which talked about how Facebook has been involved in elections and a bunch of other things, stated this: as evidence accumulated that Facebook's power could also be exploited to disrupt elections, broadcast viral propaganda, and inspire deadly campaigns of hate around the globe, Mr. Zuckerberg and Ms. Sandberg stumbled. Bent on growth, the pair ignored warning signs and then sought to conceal them from the public view. Do you think that's what happened? Do you think, bent on growth, Facebook has ignored all the signs and the symptoms which were there?
I think if it hasn't ignored them, then it definitely hasn't taken them as seriously as it should. We need to understand that at a time when we're getting more media than ever before through a variety of publications and platforms, that people are going to be looking for more extremist content only because when we become experienced to something for long enough, it becomes mundane to us. We become used to it. And therefore, platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram almost naturally push us towards those areas because it's what human desires compel us to. Now, whether or not I don't believe that's a Facebook's own political ideology. I think Facebook's political ideology is, as you say, to make profit. I don't think that's necessarily based on right-wing views or left-wing views. I think it's simply just, it's giving us the demand that we want and to some extent disregarding the consequences that it might have on society.
Okay, so Adam, you said here that Facebook has ignored it, but has not gone to the extent that it should have. So in relation to that, something that Facebook has recently announced is a crackdown on white nationalism. And this was something that was brought to light by a Vice News motherboard, which stated that in last year, in 2018, despite the fact that Facebook was saying that it was going to have a crackdown on hate speech, they did not see white nationalism or white supremacy as a threat. So over here, wasn't that a blatant ignoring of something that was very widespread on their platform?
I think it is, yes. And I think it's part of a greater symptom where we have become almost accustomed to right-wing talking points like white supremacy and white nationalism becoming somewhat acceptable through politicians such as Bolsonaro in Brazil and President Trump in America. I think Facebook's ability to accept that for its widespread means, Twitter similarly for Trump's newsworthiness rather than actually the content of his message, is what's resulting in these views being propagated. And it's only when something visibly horrific, say like the shooting in Christchurch, that has so many people emotionally charged, can really affect change, or certainly affect change in Facebook's eyes. I think from the view of many everyday users, Facebook's decision that white nationalism is separate from the basis of hate speech that is prohibited by its privacy policy is something incorrect. And I think it's something that Facebook needs to address further, especially when consulting with experts that it should be using to create these policies.
Yeah. So, Mr. Ross, something that Adam mentioned here was that white supremacy and white nationalist narratives have become so widely accepted that even Facebook didn't see them as a threat. So in regards to that, what do you think needs to be done in order to counter these narratives that hold wider public, the wider public finds them to be acceptable? But what should these social media platforms do to navigate through that?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the time that we live in now, we have a widely regarded as a white nationalist sitting in the White House. And his platform, 55 million followers on Twitter, he's able to preach that white nationalist message. And the problem that I see with these social media platforms spreading that message, obviously it's hard to not cover something that the most powerful man in the world says, but the fact that he's getting his news from alt-right media organizations that is fed to him and fed through millions of his supporters simply by the algorithm that is going to show you the information that you are most likely going to react with. So I think, as I said before, I think this needs government intervention. Yeah. Facebook, at the end of the day, is a private company. It is in their interest to monitor this information and censor information that is either false or misleading, derogatory, or dangerous. But I think there's only so much that they can do at a rapid enough pace. They need the funding behind them, not only from the company themselves, but from international governments to come in and make sure that this content is censored, is taken down, and ensure that correct narratives are being spread and that people are not being endangered simply by...
Ross, something that you're talking here brings to my mind a dilemma. So you're saying that the government needs to control Facebook, needs to have greater control over Facebook. And then you also talked about how one of the greatest white nationalists is sitting in the White House. So what happens in that instance? Would government intervention not only exacerbate the problem?
That's a very valid point. And I think there is obviously a problem there where you have someone in charge of a government obviously wanting to spread his own message. But I think that if you have an international contingent, not just individual governments, in that case you would have, say, dictators dictating to Facebook the information that they want to be allowed in their own countries. But I think if you had an international agreement between a multitude of countries that all came together with Facebook, who have shown that they are willing to tackle this problem, but I think if everyone came together to make that happen, that the results would be a lot more beneficial than the company acting by itself.
Yeah, okay, so I take your point there. I want to go back to something that Adam was talking about, was the Christchurch shooting. And Adam, if you could just take us through what exactly happened wrong in that instance and how that live stream went so viral and what Facebook has realized after it.
So what happened with the Christchurch shooting is that the shooter uploaded a live stream of him, taking lives and murdering people. And Facebook's algorithm and Facebook's content moderation cannot effectively take down videos like that because, I've spoken to Facebook about this, they don't have enough data to immediately flag content like that and take it down. For example, content similar to that is closer to like a video game and that sort of stuff. And Facebook is very conscious that it doesn't want to get the two mixed up.
So over here, this was the most gruesome thing that could be uploaded, and Facebook could not distinguish what it was, whether it was violence or not. Their algorithms failed. So what are the point of these monitoring algorithms?
The point of those monitoring algorithms are good for text, but for when searching for videos like that, as we've seen with companies trying to take down copyrighted information, it can be very difficult to train the algorithm on to take down that information. And although Facebook's pushing for government regulation, ultimately it's going up against the limits of the technology so far. I think it's also worth pointing out that the regulation that Facebook is desiring would ultimately leave Facebook still in control of its platform, would allow it to essentially pass the buck onto different government bodies for what is or is not good regulation. And in terms of data transparency and data sharing, which Zuckerberg has advocated in its Washington Post piece, is something that it's wanted to do by fusing data from WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook, something that goes against suggestions made by critics like Senator Warren in America. So I think while Facebook's taking good actions in suggesting these regulations, we shouldn't simply take that at face value. Zuckerberg will be able to use his power to lobby governments into creating policy that will be beneficial for Facebook, which might not necessarily be beneficial for everyone and might not necessarily stop incidents like the Christchurch shooting from becoming so viral on the platforms.
Yeah. Okay, so Mr. Ross, something that Mark Zuckerberg talked about was the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, and that's something that nations all around the world should aspire towards. Can you tell us about this regulation, what it exactly is, how does it protect civilians and citizens even further?
Well, I wouldn't know the ins and outs of the regulation itself, but at the end of the day, it is a regulation that is being put forward in order to protect us, the individuals across the world, and the sharing of our information by social media platforms and other internet platforms themselves. I think it is obviously an incredibly important regulation, but to an earlier point, if we look at, I can't remember the name of the law, but Germany, the German government passed a law which put the burden of information on Facebook. So any information that was available on their platform, it didn't matter if they were the creators of such information, they had the burden of whether this information was credible or dangerous, etc. So I think any information or any legislation that is put forward in order to, one, protect the individual, but to ensure that this burden is placed on not only the company but the governments themselves in effectively tackling this, will be an effective measure in the future. Yeah,
and Adam, what more could you perhaps add to the General Protection Regulation and shedding light on it?
What GDPR essentially does is ensures that companies have sufficient regulation over the data and ensures that users know exactly what data is or is not being provided to those companies. Now, and the reason for that being implemented is to try and avoid things like data breaches and to avoid scandals such as the Cambridge Analytica one, where so many people gave away so much personal information that it could be used for nefarious purposes. I think implementing more regulation like that is definitely a good thing, but it remains to be seen how companies that have such power, not just over their own platforms, but in terms of lobbying, will be able to implement that regulation successfully.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much, Adam, for shedding light on that. We're also joined by Dr. Cassidy, who's a social media psychologist. Thank you so much, Dr. Arthur, for joining us. Dr. Arthur, we hear a lot about how social media is influencing political opinions, how it's creating greater polarization. What could you tell us about that? Are these all myths, or or is in fact social media and specifically Facebook creating all of this?
Well, we do know from scientific research as celebrity psychologists that Facebook, besides the billions of users it currently has, and this is developing at an alarming rate, it does tend to affect the identity, the personal identity of the individual user, simply because of a wide variety of variables, so things like, for example, the amount of context one is using, which are really fake contexts. In my clinic, I see many young people who've been trolled over Facebook. I'm dealing with young people who have social media addictions because of Facebook and Instagram especially. I'm getting young people who are motivated to actually promulgate, quite a lot of details about themselves across the world without any thought, because of the high level of emotionality and impulsivity at seeing the novelty features on Facebook. Yeah. And so the more novel the Facebook is, even the ethos behind Facebook that we can tune into anyone across the world.
Yeah, so
that essentially is a good thing, but it is producing psychological addictions.
Yeah, so Dr. Arthur, you're talking about how there is psychological addictions, and one thing I'd want to ask you is in regards to how social media and specifically Facebook is related to violence and why we see so many violent posts being circulated. What goes on in the heads of the users?
Well, let me put it quite concisely to you. Whenever we see a road accident or a shooting or a stabbing, immediately people who are nearby will take this most horrific and grotesque image. They will put this up on Facebook simply because these guys work as a gang, and they work trying to increase their own self-esteem and status as gang members. And the more grotesque I can put up this image on screen on Facebook, then I'm going to get more likes, or I'm going to feel this inflates my self-ego, my self-esteem, and self-identity. So they raise their own self-esteem within the social deviant group that they belong to. Yeah. The second thing is that social media, this type of video that we have on YouTube as well, once it goes up, and we intend, the motivation is to get the same effect, is to display as much blood as we can, as much death scenes as we can, because the young people who do this do suffer from very often antisocial personality disorders. And so we see them actually in my own clinic, and so they will tell me that they really feel good about this. Yeah. So they're sociopathic, for example. They tend quite a number, not all of them, but most of them do tend to have underlying psychopathological traits. So they have no empathy. They lack empathy. So they don't care who sees these. The most important thing is their whole introspective attitude. They do it simply because they feel that this makes me look good on social media because I put up the most awful, horrible, horrific death scenes, stabbing scenes. And so that's good for me. That's the way they see things.
Yeah. And Dr. Arthur, do you think this is increasing when you're witnessing and when you're observing social media trends? Do you think this is increasing this desire to put more violent material out there?
Yes, and I advocate really that we need to put a brake on this. Facebook, from what I read in press reports recently, were to take down grotesque images pretty immediately. 6 weeks after, they're still doing this. And I'm very concerned about that Facebook have broken their promise to the public by still allowing grotesque, evil images to be put up at Facebook and Instagram. And I think that we have to step back and say to the government, enough is enough. Yeah. Because we're damaging the minds of young people and we are creating a more immoral society. Yeah. And so we need to really get people back to economic, social respectability with love and respect for each other across cultures, and to show, look, enough is enough. We need to train the minds. And by the way, can I just mention very briefly, this is called social learning effects. And people socially learn the behavior from what they do see. A visual graphic image will leave an imprint of memory. So people do tend to want to focus much more on graphic images because we learn by doing that. Learn by observation and vicarious observation. And so this vicarious learning has a very negative effect by doing that. If we put on positive images, rather than negative images, then we're going to create a much more positive identity in young people going through the adolescent years.
Yeah. Dr. Arthur, just a last question to you here. When we talk about Facebook's role in creating and molding political opinions, one of the things that comes up is, since the features of Facebook allow for such a rapid dissemination of information, when propaganda is being spread on this platform, the main motive is to confuse the audience as opposed to cementing certain views. What would you say to that?
Well, let me put it like this. We have to have independent monitoring and much more emphatic regulation of what goes on. I'm not convinced at all, and I haven't been for many years, that the moderation is worth it. It's pretty worthless, to be truthful. We do have to have a very rigorous, professional, independent monitoring organization that will be monitoring every aspect of what goes on the internet from Facebook and Instagram, because we're doing much, much more damage. And the quality of monitoring is appalling that we're seeing at the minute. It's simply not working. Yeah. And we have to go back to basics and redress the issue as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Arthur, for joining us and taking the time to talk to us. Adam, back to you. When we have been talking about Facebook's policies now in order to crack down on hate speech, and they have also announced that they want to restrict the use of live streaming, I wonder, do you think that Facebook's approach to dealing with these scandals, to these crises, has always been one of disaster management as opposed to being preemptive, proactive before something happens?
I would absolutely say so, yes. Facebook's opinion has very much, in my view, been to deal with these problems as they arise rather than dealing with the root cause. Now, I think there are a number of different ways that Facebook can do this. I think that Facebook should take, and other social media companies should take, more pressure to empower organizations that deal with anti-racism, that promote this connectivity in a beneficial way, rather than trying to squash the bugs as they appear. For example, in dealing with fake news, in the UK, Facebook said that it was going to put more money into training journalists. Now, it wasn't a very large amount of money, but the intention was there. Similarly, if Facebook did the same thing in empowering organizations like, for example, Hope Not Hate in the UK, then maybe that will result in people having less of these malicious opinions, less racism, less sexism, and therefore Facebook will actually have to do less to take that content down from its platform.
Ross, do you agree with what Adam is saying here? And do you think it's possible to change the audience and the consumers on how to use Facebook, or do you think Facebook can only change its platform?
I do agree with Adam. I think it is possible to educate the world, I suppose, and bring a wider discourse to this discussion. But I think, as we've seen from the tragic events in New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, days after the massacre, she announced that she was banning all automatic weapons. So I think in the wake of these tragic events, it has been shown that massive change can come, massive beneficial change can come. So I think the fact that you and I and Adam are talking about this and people are watching across the world means that this is a spreading conversation with growing importance. And I think, yes, to answer your question, the wider populace will be educated on this issue if they pay attention. And I think, again, to hammer home my point of government legislation, I think what needs to be investigated is the algorithms that spread this information. At the end of the day, the algorithms are private to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, etc. But I think if there's more transparency with these applications, that there will be not only a greater discourse, but also a better informed public.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment, Ross. We're also joined by Mr. Emmanuel Dupuy, who's a political analyst joining us from Paris. Thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel, for joining us. So, Mr. Emmanuel, what I was trying to ask you here was that, do you think Facebook has any inherent political biases?
Well, I think you must have in mind that in France and in Europe, we are in a special position. We've just drafted a law. The law is trying to be implemented concerning general data protection regulation at the level of European Union, and a certain number of countries in which, of course, France is a bit more severe than other European countries in regards to a certain number of providers of social media, such as Facebook, for example, but as well as on LinkedIn and Twitter. So I don't see that there is a biased political perspective on that, but there is more political pressure on these providers of information.
Yeah.
Of course, in France, we have a very special dedication on that issue, as our president, Emmanuel Macron, has recently mentioned the fact that he was very worried about the implication of propaganda and dissemination of information in regards to political elections. Of course, he has in mind the fact that the way that a certain number of social media information or misinformation were used during his election in May 2017. But of course, he's thinking about the European election. And by the way, a week ago, he made a statement saying that he would be that European leaders should be very vigilant on the way social media, the information is used or misused by a certain number of in a certain number of cases. Of course,
and Mr. Emmanuel, that makes me question what is happening with the Yellow Vest protests here, and how we know that a large number of these protesters were mobilized through the use of Facebook. What role do you think Facebook is playing here? And we also hear about claims of Russian interferences. What could you tell us about that?
I would be very precautious about the fact that the Yellow Vest is fueled or has been used or has been in close connection with social media. The Yellow Vest movement has started 5 months ago with a general protest, which did not need the social media to implement itself. It started from a special number of grievances inside territories amongst associations of citizens who created the organization of the Yellow Vest. And I have to say that the media, traditional media, information media, played a better role or a bigger role than social media or the use of social media in regards to Yellow Vest. What is true, nevertheless, is the fact that the movement is now shifting to a more political movement, and of course is using social media to emphasize its political offer and to find new ways to communicate, not only having manifestation, but having more presence in internet, and of course stabilizing or reinforcing or enhancing its political offer.
Do you feel like that's still the case generally as well, that traditional media forms have greater power and value than social media?
Well, we are experiencing and seeing in France a very interesting moment in which new TV channels and new radio channels, there is a new political offer, new media offer, of course, with foreign broadcasters coming to France. There is a television which has its offices in Israel, Even 4. Of course, you are aware of the special grievance in regards to Russia Today, which is now experiencing or putting in emphasis a new reality in which these media have a bigger audience on YouTube or on their Facebook pages than they have on the mediatical dimension. So I would argue the fact that everyone is mixing both traditional media and, of course, the use of internet. The official media, such as RFI, France 24, are now more focusing on digital communication than on traditional radio or television broadcasting. So everyone is moving to a more digitalization of the political arena, and of course this has been shifted, or this has been enhanced by the foreign media, as they are now concurrencing or putting in concurrence traditional French media.
Yeah, and Mr. Emmanuel, stay with us. Something that was talked about by all the guests that we've had on the show is having an independent body monitoring social media. And something I want to ask Mr. Ross here is how that would happen. practically? Because we know that if there's an independent body and if there is representation from different countries, there will be many competing interests. There will be many different contexts that each representative is coming from. So how can that practically happen?
That is very true. But I think, for example, as we saw with the Paris Climate Agreement, where nearly every single country in the world came together with a common shared goal in every single country's self-interest, I believe that this issue is in the same merit as the Paris Climate Agreement. This is an issue that affects every single country throughout the world. So in terms of the bureaucracy that would surround something like that happening, of as many countries as possible forming a coalition, I think there certainly would be a lot of bureaucracy, but it's certainly something that we can strive for. And the fact that this is being debated means that it is something of interest to the majority of the population of the world. So I think the more broad the discussion becomes, the more solutions that will be on the table.
Yeah. And Mr. Emmanuel, last to you, do you agree with what Ross has stated here, that this is a possible solution, and more discussion that happens, we can move towards a solution on how to deal with Facebook and other social media platforms?
Well, I think that the issue must be put in regards to what is happening in the European Union. All of the social media that we're talking about are companies, private companies, and therefore they must abide by a certain number of rules, fiscal rules amongst them. And this is the way we can implement or maybe control them. I'm not sure we have a regulation capability. We are trying to work on that. In the francophone arena, we are thinking of a regulator which could regulate all of the francophone speaking media. We have, of course, these bodies in France, but I think we are trying to have a common European position on that. And as we have seen in the past weeks, it's very difficult. Everyone agreed on the fact that these companies should pay their taxes, and again, it's a way to control them and have more influence on what they can provide for transparency, independence, and of course, true information. But of course, we have experienced in the last days that we have witnessed in the last days that a certain number of countries are not following the French position. The French position is the only one to have a robust posture on that issue. So I'm quite sure that we have to have a transnational position on that. I'm willing to think that European level is a good level, of course, to think about these questions. But I do understand the fact that not all of our partners are on the same track.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel, for joining us and taking the time to talk to us. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to discuss this further. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. While we discuss all the scandals Facebook has been facing and what it is doing to rectify the situation, Ross, something that Facebook has recently done is close down a number of accounts ranging from India to Russia to Iran. What do you think was the purpose of this, and what do you think was the reason behind closing down these accounts?
I believe a discussion began last week when Facebook shut down the account of the White House Director of Social Media, and that gained a lot of traction on America's right. Which now I don't know about the specific countries that you mentioned, but in the case of the White House Social Media Director, Facebook came out and said that they shut down his account because his account was acting the same way that a bot would act. They call it, I believe, shadow. I can't remember the exact phrase they use, but the company themselves described this. I suppose participation on social media as bots would tend to use very similar language post through post. Yeah. And say if
so, the basic premise was that these are fake accounts that are not being operated by humans.
Exactly. Yeah. But then in the case of the White House social media director, once this was raised to the correct department, I assume, in Facebook, they rectified this.
Yeah.
So I think Facebook are making an effort to crack down on the spread of fake information through fake accounts or through bots. But I think the technology that they have is not ever going to catch everything. And I think what they're doing, maybe they're overstepping. And if they are censoring accounts that are completely viable, then that would be an overstep. But at the end of the day, it is still run by humans, the non-algorithmic section of their monitoring systems. So I think humans will always result in human error. But again, there needs to be more discussion had about this topic in order to find out, is Facebook having a certain bias or leaning towards a certain way of thinking? Or is this just Facebook trying to rectify what they've seen being amped up since 2016?
Yeah. Adam, what would your opinion be to that?
I think that Facebook and other social medias should definitely take any action it can to take down bots, no matter of their political allegiance. As we've seen before, manipulation through large amounts of inauthentic behavior can have negative qualities and ultimately need to be removed. Now, Facebook doing that in countries like Iran and Russia for obvious reasons is very beneficial, but it is something that needs to be rolled out across the world. And to Facebook credit, is being done so. Facebook is surprisingly good at taking down inauthentic behavior and stopping these instances. Yeah. As they're happening, if not before they happen.
You're saying that regardless of whoever is operating these bots, they should be taken down. But let me ask you this. Do you think that Facebook's crackdown in any way is impartial bias?
Impartial bias in what respect, sorry?
In terms of showing a political leaning towards one political party in a host country? I
think perhaps in this instance, I don't know specifically, but we know that Facebook has shown political biases in the past. For example, in Venezuela, one of the countries where it has taken down botnets, Facebook decided to take the Instagram verification from the president of Venezuela and gave it to instead I can't remember his name, but the new incumbent that is being recognized by numerous Western countries. Facebook and its other platforms definitely have a political allegiance in that respect and a certain political biases. But when it comes to botnets, simply put, all of them should be removed because the reflection of inauthentic behavior is something that isn't beneficial to any debate, ultimately. And
since we're talking about algorithms here, Adam, something that Facebook has revealed is that now it's going to give an option for people to click on their newsfeed items to see why it's there. So this is a major change in its newsfeed algorithm when people did not know why something was appearing. What could you tell us about that?
I think it's a very good idea, and I think it's something that Facebook has definite concerns over. Facebook's issue with the wider public is one about trust, and allowing greater transparency on why content actually appears on the newsfeed and becomes viral in general is something that is only going to be beneficial. Now, whether enough people click on it is always an issue. It's the same issue that that Facebook faces when it says that its users should report content themselves rather than Facebook perhaps taking more proactive measures. But nevertheless, the more information that big companies such as Facebook can give over how its product works, the better that the experience will be.
Yeah. And Ross, we've been talking a lot about what has happened in the past. Do you think that the consumers and the users of Facebook now have a trust deficit with the social media platform?
Absolutely. I think, especially in the wake of the 2016 election and the news that came out about Cambridge Analytica and users' data and information being shared to companies without their knowledge, I think there's definitely a massive distrust. I know myself, I am now very careful about what I put up online. because at the end of the day, we are being sold to, before the GDPR regulations came in, we were being sold as goods to whatever highest bidder wanted our information to be used for political targeting or advertising on Facebook. I don't know if this mistrust will be amended. I think that there will certainly be a long-lasting skeptical thought towards Facebook. And I think it's in their interest to try and do as much as they can to amend that. But again, I don't know if that ever will happen.
And Ross, we've been talking about how Facebook wants to rectify its ways, but also know that it's operating on a business model. So do you think that these privacy breaches, all that we've seen in the past, will continue to happen in the future? What's your take on that?
I don't know if they will happen on as wide a scale as they have in the past 2 to 3 years, because obviously, as we are having this conversation, Facebook are actively trying to stop that from happening. I think it will be hard to crack down on every breach 100%, because, as I said, it is human error that will result in these breaches. But I think it is going to be a long process in order to rectify all of these damages. Yeah.
And last question to you, Adam. With all that Facebook is doing right now, do you think it's finally redeeming itself?
I think Facebook as a company is doing good, in general, doing good work to redeem itself. I think that Zuckerberg's speeches and op-eds that he's putting across are not necessarily doing it as effectively as it could be, for the reasons that I've mentioned previously on the sort of obvious political lobbying that could happen with how Zuckerberg wants to use the platform and how Zuckerberg sees the platform working. I've spoken to numerous moderators and numerous engineers at Facebook that want to make the platform better and are finding difficulty in that. And as you say, it's many human people trying to do a good thing, but ultimately the business model gets in the way of that. But that's something that the public isn't going to see. And it is something that needs to be addressed by Facebook and by its CEO and by its higher-ups with much more explicit messages.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Adam Smith, for joining us. Thank you so much, Mr. Ross O'Leary, for joining us. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again tomorrow. Goodbye and take care.